man who wanted to be a scholar and never got a chance because he was such a good politician. Of all the revolutionaries, if I could sit with one at dinner, he'd be the one.
But Jefferson embodies America's deepest conflicts and contradictions. Having grown up on a wealthy Virginia plantation, he inherited aristocratic credentials and the 200 slaves to prove it. Yet Jefferson holds to an ideal America, a place of opportunity for everyone, a place where every American is in charge of his own fate. The child nation is growing up and longs to move beyond the shadow of its parent.
But they had grown up and they wanted an independent say about how their laws were made and who governed them. And Jefferson knew all of that. He knew that he wasn't writing anything that was revolutionary in the eyes of his own people, only in the rest of the world.
Mid-June 1776. Armed with these notions and a deadline of 2 weeks, Jefferson locks himself into a Philadelphia boarding house.
He sat in one room in the July sweltering heat of Philadelphia with the flies buzzing all about him, and he forgot all of that, and he just sat down and he wrote and he wrote and he wrote out of his head.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for a people to advance from that subordination in which they have hitherto remained, the opinions of mankind impelled him to the change. Thomas Jefferson.
It is a heady task for a fairly young mind. Every word must contain a reason to die for. Every sentence an urgent cause to justify rising up against a king.
Think about it, the Declaration of Independence is a terribly radical document. That document says that if the government isn't treating you the way you think it should, and if you suffer this mistreatment over a period of time, you've got the right to rise up and destroy that government, to change it. That's a radical thing to say.
But Jefferson soon stumbles over the central question of the Revolution. It hangs in the hot air. Who will become a free American? In Britain, the elite legislated. Now, Jefferson's pen could reinvent all that. Would the new America mean rights for every man, woman, child, and even slave?
Who's in and who's out? Who's included? Does this mean everybody? Does this mean only the rich? Does this mean property holders? How far do we go? Who's included in this new nation?
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Jefferson reaches for the highest ideals, but the contradictions of his words come back to haunt him.
All the talk about freedom and liberty, all of this reaches the ears of nearly 500,000 colonists who are black. That's 1/5 of the population.
Slavery already divides the colonies. Now, with the talk of independence, it takes front row. Some colonists draw the line at giving liberty to slaves. Others bristle at the hypocrisy of fighting for independence while sanctioning slavery. Jefferson himself remains divided. His own slaves watch their fates debated before them.
When Thomas Jefferson, incidentally the holder of over 100 slaves at this moment, wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." You don't think his slaves said, "Right on, John, right, right on, Thomas," that this is precisely what we want.
Many slaves choose not to wait. From cities and plantations across America, blacks begin an exodus. They flee.
On Washington's plantation, we know that 17 slaves ran. Stephen, 20 years old, a cooper by trade. Deborah, a 16-year-old woman. Peter, an old man. 23 fled from Jefferson. These people had made decisions. What's best for them? Patriot or loyalist didn't really matter. What's my best bet?
What does a man like Jefferson make of this when the slaves flee? Well, it throws in his face the notion of the enlightened slave master. And it comes upon him with great force, I think, if it hadn't before. There's a fundamental contradiction in this whole revolution project between fighting for unalienable rights and holding slaves. He knew that.
Jefferson takes aim at slavery with scathing indictments of its wrongfulness. He puts them in his draft, yet falls short of calling for the end of slaveholding. Major battles are looming. Compromises must be made. In Philadelphia, his draft will soon be thrown to the varied interests in Congress. They will tear it apart. While in New York, the Continental Army prepares to put its life on the line for the dream of independence. Strongest blows. July 1st, 1776. A draft of the Declaration is delivered to Congress. The delegates immediately tear into it.
The excruciating part took place after the document was written, and that was 3 days of debate in Congress, in which Congress took out 89 different things, including any language criticizing the practice of slavery. And Jefferson just sat there writhing through the whole thing.
The issue of slavery is left for another time.
There are flickers of doubt. They're bothered by it. They can't fix it. They kick it down the road. They basically postpone the problem to be reckoned with on another day. That day became the Civil War. It was a pretty bad day. But it's not that they're not bothered by it. They know it's wrong, they just don't know how to deal with it.
The pressure of time once again intervenes. On July 2nd, the matter of independence must be put to a vote. It passes.
The second day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable in the history of America. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore. John Adams, Congressional Delegate.
Adams is a little off on the date, but close. 2 more days are necessary to hammer out the final declaration. On July 4th, independence becomes written fact. Within days, copies travel by horseback throughout the colonies. No one had set out to create a war of independence, yet they had delivered one.
In the town squares all over the country, church bells were ringing and people were huzzahing. The crowd was applauding. People really did believe the birthday of a new world is at hand.
These united colonies are, and of right ought to